And I'm Heidi Wyman. I'm a transition consultant. I'm a consultant for Stratford Learning Center, which provides special education services to schools, mostly in the greater Seacoast area, but throughout the state as well. And I also own my own consulting firm. And so and before that I worked for Community Partners. So that was 16 years ago. And it was actually when I was working at Community Partners that I wrote a grant to kick off this role of transition hub for secondary transition, because having that connector of person who can kind of connect the dots in transition is a really important thing. And it's why I've been able to keep myself in a job for all these years. So transition is super complex. It's a big topic. And like I said, I'm going to bring forward the things that I think are key to think about, but we're going to touch on them for as long or as little as you need to. And we will at the very end have an opportunity to talk about whether or not anybody on the call would like to set up a private consultation to talk about transition for you individually. That is something that Community Partners support. So I'm going to take these slides down for 1 second because I just like this visual. When we start to talk about transition planning. Sometimes I use a staircase visual when I talk about transition. Sometimes I use a pathway like this. Whether it's a staircase or a path, it's a big process of planning for something that is out of sight right now. If you think about the goals for transition as being just beyond this bend, I think that's where this path really helps me visualize what the process is like. You're being asked to think about the thing that is unknown, and to answer questions about what kind of support you're going to want in this unknown environment. And so school is asking you to sign off on a planning process that's supposed to support your child in a way that you are not really sure what they're going to need. So that's a difficult one. All right, so I'm gonna go back to the slides now. So as I was saying before, I have been a transition consultant for 16 years. Usually my big role as a consultant is to try to connect the dots. I try to figure out for any particular individual that I'm consulting with, I have kind of a short-term role. I don't provide services, except in really limited cases. Really what I do is talk about, well, what do you want things to look like? And here are my recommendations about what you should do next. So what I've tried to put together today are some key steps that I think anyone, regardless of where they are in the transition process, should be taking. Everybody's going to be at a different point. Transition looks different for every student because it's a very personal and very individualized process. Every single one of us, if we shared stories about what we thought our lives would look like after high school compared to maybe where they are now, or our vision for what our life after high school was going to be, it would probably be we would have very different experiences, and we all probably took very different pathways. And that's no different for any of the students who are eligible for Community Partners. So these are some of the key steps that I think that every individual should be moving through, specifically when they're eligible for area agency services. And we will move into each one of these in a little bit more detail. Like I said, I will make these slides available to you via email. Sorry that we weren't able to have them for today, so you could actually be making notes on them. It's always a little bit of a toss-up for me about whether or not to give you the paper and whether or not that's going to be distracting on an online format. So let's move into the first one, which we're going to talk about creating and refining a description of the year after high school, being sure that you understand diploma types, when school services will end, and that there's some coordination in your transition services section of the IEP, ways to help students build self-determination skills, and which I put in quotes because that's the special education lingo. It's really helping them learn to speak for themselves. Certainly most parents of students in special education have built some self-advocacy or some advocacy skills as parents to be in these IEP meetings. Now you're in the position of trying to make sure that your child has built self-advocacy skill. because they need to start stepping into more of a lead role. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into number 3. I'll share a little bit about getting community partners in New Hampshire Voc Rehab involved, and show you a couple of timelines that Community Partners has put together so you can get a sense of the scope of what the steps are to getting community partners involvement. And I'll share a little bit as well about that from the New Hampshire Voc Rehab perspective. And then just a quick slide about post-secondary education options and supports. There are a lot of different post-secondary possibilities. There are programs that are under development here in New Hampshire, and then there are also programs all across the country, which is not to say college is not for everybody. Even if you're not going to get some kind of further education, formal education, you're probably going to need some kind of training to hold any kind of a job. So really starting to think about what kind of post-secondary education or training a student is going to need is really important. And maybe that's going to be very, very practical, concrete, daily living skill training. That's okay. But that is a part of that process of thinking about, are we talking about going to some sort of post-secondary college program for students with intellectual disabilities, or are we talking about daily living skill training? They're all in the IEP in the same category, and they all need the same amount of thought put into them to really come up with a meaningful post-school plan. So let's move right into the vision, coming up with that vision for school after high school, for life after high school. A couple of different tools that I'm going to send you that I think are good places to start. These are tools that have been actually adapted or adopted by the state developmental services, and they're encouraging area agencies to use them. This is called the Charting the Life course, Life Trajectory worksheet. And this really asks you to think about what is your vision for a good life versus what you do not want. And that can be a very concrete way to get started with this process, to just start with these 2 bubbles. Here's what I think would be a good life for my child, or as an individual, this is what I would like for a good life, and vice versa, this is what I don't want to see happen. Sometimes, especially when we are talking about the unknowns, sometimes what I don't want can be an easier place to start, because you can be sure that you don't want your child to, right? And then you can finish that sentence. And then that can sometimes, you can sort of get those pieces out and then start to think, okay, well, the converse of that is, what do I want? If I don't want them to be limited or be doing something that's meaningless, let's find the opposite of that. What would be meaningful? What would it look like if they were having that good life that we all want to strive for? Breaking that down into more detail is a second handout that I'll be sending, which is a tool for developing that vision, which really gives you the chance to think about all aspects of the individual. You might want to think about daily life and employment, about community living, social and spirituality, social aspects and spirituality, healthy living, safety and security, and all those categories. And that's really, if you're going to be doing this in the third person for the individual. If your child is able to think in this way, it's very difficult for some students to think in the abstract or to even verbalize some of the answers to these questions. But when they are able to, it's a great thing for them to be able to say, to answer these questions to the best of their ability. Really, that's what transition planning should be about. Transition planning should be about how much of this can they answer, and so what kind of transition services should we put in place so they can answer more of them? Because we want students to be able to start thinking about, be thinking about all these things. And if we don't put the services in place to help them do that, why would they? I certainly know with my 14-year-old, if I didn't take away his Wi-Fi, we would never get there. So that's where we are right now. Boy, homeschooling was a really good time. Sorry, that's the little personal side note for me. So those are a couple of planning tools. Those are the life trajectory and vision planning tools. I've also provided a couple of basic questionnaires, because there can be These are questionnaires that I created as I was working with school districts. This just very basic questionnaire. Transition assessment is something that schools are required to do, and every school does it very, very differently. When a student fills out a form like this, it is considered transition assessment if it's in writing and if it gets in the student file. And for that reason, it really should be what the IEP is based on. So questions like, what are your strengths? What are you good at? What are your challenges? What's the best thing you could accomplish? Anything's possible. Just, you know, what's your dream life? What do you think your life will look like after high school? What will you do for work? This is really valuable transition assessment information. It's a really good starting point. And it's also just a really good annual check-in. So even if it's been done one time, sometimes it can be really useful to go back to it and do it again. So I would also encourage that if you do something like this, that you then provide it to the school if they haven't already started doing some sort of questionnaire like that. This is what is required to be in the IEP. The answers to this from the student is what's required. Now, of course, you as a parent want to be able to put your input as well. And so there's a parent input sheet. If you know that your thoughts and your students' thoughts are very, very different, it's okay to complete both of these and provide them to the school so they start to understand where you're coming from when it comes to transition. If you're concerned about whether or not the school is engaging in transition planning in the way that you want them to, and you provide them with this information to make sure it gets into the record, that's a really important piece for you to make sure that you have communicated your thoughts on these particular items. I'm gonna head back to the slides here. Yeah, and you know, it's not only required in the IEP as transition assessment, it is also something every other support that you might want to bring into your child's life as transition goes on is going to ask for this kind of information in one way or another. VR is going to want to know what's your employment goal, and the area agency community partners is going to say, what are you looking for services? And any sort of post-secondary education is going to want to know what kind of further education and why do you want to do this and what kind of support will you need? So doing that sort of visioning process is really going to help you respond when those entities start asking those questions. And since I brought up schools, NESIS, which is the New Hampshire IEP system, it is like pages 6, 7, and 8 in the IEP. This is a flyer that the Parent Information Center in New Hampshire has created. On those pages, you will see that measurable post-secondary goals are required in education, employment, and independent living. You'll see that is a portion of the IEP that should be completed by age 16, if not before. It can start before, and if you want it should be a team decision to start earlier than that. So if it's something that you want to have start earlier than that, it should, and the school says, no, we don't do that yet, it's certainly okay to be doing it now, especially given the ages of that you've all said your children are. So this is just a useful double-sided form that can give you some things to think about when you're going into a meeting that's specific to transition. And then as well, I'm going to send you a worksheet. This worksheet mimics the transition pages of the IEP. And so I just find like it can be nice to jot down your thoughts about what you would want to see in these sections of the IEP. And so that's why I've provided this. It's really important because every district in New Hampshire has a different process for New Hampshire, for transition in New Hampshire. At the state level, there's very limited oversight about student transition. And so there's a lot of variability in student transition. The IEP process has a lot of regulation attached to it. The regulation for transition is far more limited because really effective transition is so individualized that figuring out whether or not it's been effective or not can be challenging, and sometimes it's not until it's already happened that you think, wow, maybe that could have been different. So that's a good reason to start really, really soon, and to not wait until, not wait if you're ready to get started. I would say jump in. Even if the school is perhaps not at that place yet, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't be, and it's not, you're well within your rights to encourage them to be doing more now. It's important from a community partner's perspective, particularly, that you are really starting to talk to the school about diploma types, when school services will end, and what their plans are to communicate with community partners in New Hampshire Voc Rehab. We'll talk about this a little bit more when I get into the slide about community partners, but the conversation about diploma type and when your student is going to be completing high school and what their transition services are going to look like really is required by New Hampshire rules to start in 9th grade. The course of study is supposed to be in place at age 14. The course of study can be in place without that big transition services conversation happening. And so it's a complicated process, and every school does it in a very different way. And every family chooses to do it in a very different way. Some families don't want to talk about transition until 18 or 19. So I don't want to put all of this on the shoulders of the school. In some cases, it's families who say, no, I'm going to focus on biology right now and getting my kid through biology. We'll talk about transition later. And then they get through biology and they realize, oh, now that she passed biology, she's going to graduate. We should have talked about it sooner. Because once that child graduates, they are no longer eligible for special education services. So when a student graduates with a regular diploma, however the district defines that, they are no longer eligible for special education. Are working with the school for your child to get a regular education diploma, and expecting that you're going to talk about transition after that, you may find that your child is ready to graduate and they're no longer eligible for special ed. So those two conversations need to happen on parallel tracks. So depending on what a school district does, a student may be able to graduate early. Not early, but on time and on track with their class and not stay until age 21, but then they might not be eligible for special education services anymore, and community partners might not be ready for them. So community partners, Cheryl Sullivan, is a person that you really want to be connecting with now to get involved in those conversations about high school completion timeframes.
And Heidi, Elizabeth has a question. She has.
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I unmuted you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. So about special education versus VR and community partners. Okay. If my child graduates with a standard diploma,
yes,
can he still have VR services?
Yes.
And he can still have community partner services?
Yes.
Okay.
It's the timing that becomes tricky. So recently, and that actually, I didn't bring up this DHHS DOE transition document. I'm glad you mentioned that. So there was recently what's called a rules clarification to the timing for when services can be provided. So let me just say again, the rule in special education is that when a student graduates with a regular diploma, they are no longer eligible for special education. The standard practice in area agencies has been, as long as I've done this work, has been that services can't be provided until age 21. So when a student was able to get a regular diploma, which is what most of us think should happen, they were then put in a position of not being able to get services. And there was this really difficult gap. But everybody was doing what they thought they should be doing. Area agencies were doing what they thought they should be doing, which was providing services once special education services were no longer available. And the same for school districts, which was to try to get a student to get a regular diploma if that was what the team was striving for. That all came to a head at the end of last year, and cause this rule clarification, which is to say that a student can certainly graduate before age 21 and can certainly receive services before age 21. However, if Cheryl doesn't know that your child is coming, there won't be any money in the budget for them. So it is a multi-step process and a multi-year process to make sure that dollars are available for somebody who is going to be exiting sooner than age 21. It's a multi-year process if they end at age 21. So it's not really so much about the different, it's not a bad thing by any stretch to have gotten a regular diploma and to be ready sooner. But it's not as common, and it certainly requires getting community partners involved in the planning process early so they can be moving through the steps for that individual sooner than they might for somebody who's going to be coming into services at age 21. With Voc Rehab, anybody is eligible for Voc Rehab if they have a disability that might impede their ability to work. And they can be eligible now, and they can be eligible again. And once eligible, they can return for more services throughout their lifetime.
Okay, and that's Karen, correct?
That's Karen Martin Brown, is the counselor out of the Portsmouth Voc Rehab office. They do have some other counselors. So if you haven't already been connected to Karen, you might work with Ashley. She's a new counselor. Probably Karen, but maybe Ashley. And then Vanessa provides pre-employment transition services. So those are three key names out of that Portsmouth office. Vanessa is not a counselor, but Vanessa does provide some pre-employment transition services to groups of students. And there's an intake and eligibility process. So as much as you want to get Cheryl involved to make sure that you've gone through the steps you need to go through for community partners, you want to get Karen involved, or Ashley, because they're going to help you decide when it's the right time to make that referral for regular services. Voc Rehab is not going to start services unless the student is motivated to get a job and will really engage in pre-employment services, or is about 3 months away from looking for a job. So it really is very individualized about when you're going to make that referral. There are plenty of high school students who are not interested in talking about the world of work, and it's not a good idea to start a referral for them because they're not, Voc Rehab wants to open a case for somebody who wants to work. Somebody who isn't really there yet should do pre-employment transition services and start to just understand more about the world of work before the referral's made to Voc Rehab. They can still get those pre-employment transition services without the referral. So this rule clarification document is 42 pages. We are not going to go through it. However, if you are somebody who wants to know what the state says, and I was super happy when this PowerPoint presentation came out because I have wanted there to be a set of New Hampshire guidelines for my entire career. This is as close as we have right now. We do not have some states have a guidance document about how everybody's supposed to play in the sandbox together. We haven't had that before. This is as close as we have in the state of New Hampshire for some sort of guidance document about how all these partners, and these are the partners who put this together. So NHDHHS is Department of Health and Human Services, the Bureau of Developmental Services, that is the state level entity above community partners. Bureau of Student Support, New Hampshire DOE, that is the state special ed office. And then at the very bottom here, I can't quite see it under my Zoom toolbar, is Lisa Hinson-Hatz from New Hampshire Voc Rehab. So this PowerPoint, in my view, is one of the first times that the state has come together and said from all these partners, here's how we think transition should go. So this is a good document if you feel like you're struggling to connect things that I talk about to the things that you hear at a school. You might want to pull this up and read read the materials that are provided in here and ask the school to respond if you're seeing things not happening in a way that you thought they should be. And I think we can move on to, yeah. So let's move on to self-determination skills. One of the other items that I'm going to share with you is just a little packet called student-led IEP tips. As I was saying before, you've been advocating for your child their entire lives in one way or another. You've had a special brand of advocacy that you've had to do through IEPs, but as parents, that's what we do. We advocate for our children. We learn how to advocate in the IEP process. They now are becoming the age where they need to be able to advocate for themselves at whatever level they're able to. And so that's going to mean that they're going to step into taking more responsibility and taking more leadership at the level they're able to or willing to. If it's not something that you're going to be able to force them to do. If they don't wanna, they're not gonna. But it is absolutely key to that next stage of development. And we hear about that, and we've heard about that, I think, for a long time in terms of feeling as though that sort of failure to launch stage. A lot of that is just putting it on the student to have to make the decisions and make the statements. But it takes a lot to be able to ask a student. One of the things that I get frustrated about is when I'm asked to engage a student in an IEP meeting, but they weren't prepared. Like I go into a meeting and I'm really prepared because I don't like to embarrass myself. So I make sure that I know what I'm talking about and that I'm prepared and I have all my materials. And a lot of times students are like grabbed out of class and plunked in a meeting and then expected to answer questions, like big questions in front of a room full of adults. That's just not fair. And I would never expect a student to engage effectively. So the reason I created this student-led IEP tips handout that I'm going to include in the packet that Jackie sends you is just to be thinking about what we need to do to prepare a student and a family to give a student a bigger leadership role in their IEP meetings. And the only reason I say that the IEP meeting is the place to do it is that A, it's really considered best practices in special education to do something like this. So it shouldn't be a big stretch to ask a special educator to shift to a student-led IEP meeting. And just because it's also really great practice for students to start to take that kind of role. If they're getting support from community partners in the future, if they're getting support from New Hampshire Voc Rehab and any other entity out there, there's going to be an expectation that they are going to be speaking for themselves to some degree. So starting to give them that practice is such a gift. It's just giving them some of the tools to start practicing being able to speak for them. And that's what this toolkit is. There's an agenda for a student-led IEP, suggestions for how to handle a student-led IEP team meeting, which is mostly encouraging all of the adults in the room to try not to talk and to let the student speak, even if it takes them a long time to answer, and to prepare them, to give them a little bit of a script so they can know what to expect, know what's going to be asked, and really just feel confident going in that they know what they're going to talk about. I like to start by having a student just start with having the student say what they want to do after high school. Here's what I want to do for work. Here's what I want to do. Here's where I think I want to live. Here's what I think about further education and training. And that they've been prepared with the answers that you're comfortable with, that the school is expecting. This isn't about anybody having any surprises. It's about them practicing sharing information about themselves. And if they do that in writing or verbally or by PowerPoint, as long as they are taking a lead role in presenting the information, they are starting to take a lead role in their own self-determination. So I really just love to get into self-determination practices, but that's not the focus of today. So I'm not going to go off on that too much more. Aside from the student-led IEP, it's really important at this stage, students are starting to understand what their IEP says about them as much as they can understand that. which accommodations and modifications they use and why, what's useful to them, what's not useful to them, so they understand and can say in the future to a supervisor, could you write that down for me? If, for example, that's an accommodation that they really need, they need things to be in writing, or a short list, steps 1, 2, 3, that's an accommodation. And if that's the way that school gets broken down for them now, it's important for them to understand that's an accommodation they need to start learning how to ask for. So that's one simple example of helping a student understand their accommodations and modifications and how they can ask for them. So let's move on from here. We started talking about, always cognizant of the time. I always think it's, we're gonna have plenty of time, and then I'm always like, wait, gotta get through the last 3 slides. So community partners, how you're connecting to community partners in New Hampshire Voc Rehab is the next really important step. I'm gonna share a visual, and I hope it doesn't freak you out, but it is a lot. So ready? Here we go. This is why you want to connect with community partners sooner rather than later, because there's a lot that goes into the timeline. And this is the timeline from starting at 18. If your child is going to be graduating sooner than that, then this 18 needs to back up to 15 or 16. So the starting age is going to be 15 or 16. Certainly guardianship isn't going to happen until age 18, but you're packing everything into a much smaller time frame, and you want to be starting to think a lot about all those things that are going to have to take place at age 18 if the student is also graduating at age 18. So this is what the kind of stuff that you would be working on with Cheryl. And then at the 20th birthday, transitioning to working with Jay. So individual is transitioned to waitlist manager, means the individual is transitioning to working with Jay. And then here, moving to a 150-day timeline, the timeline of all of the things that are happening in that 150 days before the student enters services, or the young person enters services, because they won't be a student anymore at that point in time. So it's a lot, and we're not going to have an opportunity to get into detail on this at all, but know that these are the tools that Cheryl and Jay use in their work. And so the reason for you to be aware of this, and the reason that I'm sending it to you, is so you have a sense of the scope of what it is that you might want to be learning more about. You don't need to wait until 150 days to start learning about what these things are. And in fact, I would say starting to learn about what a lot of these acronyms are is going to make it a little bit easier once that 150 days gets started. You're not learning all that information. You already know what it means. You just actually have to start the processes with the support of folks from community partners. Cheryl and Jay, anything you want to correct me on that or clarify or anything, feel free to jump in. If I don't hear from you, I'm just going to keep talking.
Hi guys. So this is Cheryl Sullivan, and I'm sorry it took me a minute to respond because we're sitting in a conference room and Jackie is actually navigating the system. So I'm sorry about that, but yes. I would love everybody to try and reach out to me as soon as possible, especially for those young adults that will be graduating at the age of 18 and will be requiring services. It would be great for me to start working with you and everyone really from the time of transition of 9th grade, which is about 14 years old, sometimes 13 for some kiddos. And I really will get to know your family and kind of understand what your child's journey may look like, or what we can, start to gather for information for adult services, which is ultimately my goal, is to get your kiddos who are now young adults, who are now going to receive services at the age of 18 for some, 19, whatever it is that, whatever your journey brings you, where you'll be eligible for our services. That is really my biggest goal for you and your young adults, is to make sure that you are ready for adult services. So if you can get me involved a little earlier, that would be great. It would be wonderful for me to be involved in your IEPs and in your transition meetings. Some of you I've already joined in. I think I did attend a few of the IEPs for some of you that are with us tonight. So hopefully we can work together early. And that would be really my biggest goal, is to have you ready and to work with our timeline.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Thanks, Heidi. Jay?
I just, I put both of your email addresses up here on the screen. C. Sullivan at communitypartnersnh.org and J. Malouin, J-M-A-L-O-U-I-N. Did I spell it right? Okay. At communitypartnersnh.org. So there are their email addresses if you are not, if you don't already have them right at your fingertips, and you're really motivated after tonight's presentation, then there are their addresses. I know for me, sometimes just the act of trying to find that address can be a barrier. So, so there you go. Also, I want to make sure that you know, and Jay, I didn't give you a chance to speak because I thought you shook your head. Did you have anything you wanted to jump in about? Jay, did you have anything you wanted to say? I didn't really give you a chance. Okay, great. So I do want to point out that if your child is receiving community mental health services from community partners, that it's like a whole other agency underneath the same roof. So if your child receives community mental health services, you're getting therapy, any kind of in-home support from community mental health, that's a whole other agency, really. They are both under the community partners umbrella, but it's an entirely different eligibility process and entirely different transition. So don't assume that just because you're with community partners that you're with all of community partners, I guess it's a conversation I have with a lot of parents. Oh yeah, we're with community partners. And then we realize they're just not yet. So speaking quickly about New Hampshire Voc Rehab. I mentioned this a little bit before, but I want to go into a little bit more detail about it now. New Hampshire Voc Rehab offers group pre-employment transition workshops in many schools. It's a very simple registration process. It's a two-sided sign-in form. It has to be signed by a professional to confirm that the child has a disability. Many schools have pre-employment transition workshops in their schools, and even are offering them remotely during COVID. And then New Hampshire Voc Rehab offices have started to offer them independently from the schools as well. So these are workshops that are about employment readiness. They're about dressing for success and showing up on time and what the hot jobs are that are out there, and lots of different facets related to employment. And so if you, Elizabeth, I know you're saying you haven't heard back from Voc Rehab. They do offer pre-ets through the school district, but you would be a really great follow-up email to Karen to say, I haven't heard anything. Could you tell me anything about pre-employment transition services? Right? Because that is something that that your son could be a part of, regardless of the intake and eligibility process. So the pre-employment transition workshops are for people who are likely to be eligible for Voc Rehab when they go through the eligibility process. They can also receive those services after they're eligible, but they are two separate processes. One is just a two-sided piece of paper. The other, as Elizabeth, I'm sure you're familiar with, is a much more lengthy process. There's like an 8-page personal information form and a release of records that all of the school records get sent to Voc Rehab. There you go. Got it right there. Yeah. And if your school doesn't connect you, your regional office is the Portsmouth office of New Hampshire Voc Rehab, and you're welcome to contact them. If your school isn't sort of responding in a way that is timely for you. That said, when you can bring those processes together, when you can get, I don't think it's a great practice to have I don't think it's a great process to have all of those things happening separately, because really the school should be developing a coordinated set of activities where they're helping you connect the dots. Every school does it differently. So sometimes it's more than a parent can take to try to take it at the school speed. Sometimes parents are moving ahead really, really quickly, and that doesn't mean that, and that it's important to try to make that connection with the school. So if you feel like you're not all moving at the same pace, I think it's great to have a meeting about that. Just answering taking a quick look at a couple of chats there. So those are then the last item that I wanted to just touch on was, as I mentioned before, for future education and training. I'm going to send a couple of links to materials about post-secondary education programs. There are some great programs that are going on in the state of New Hampshire. UNH has a program called UNH for You that is just in its pilot year. They are working very closely with community partners on this, but they're just piloting it now. It is on campus at UNH, and it's a very innovative program. It's the first one like it in the state of New Hampshire, but there are other programs like it in other parts of the country. So New Hampshire is lagging when it comes to this kind of programming, and UNH is getting that kind of programming off the ground, which is really exciting. So that's called UNH for You. And that's a program to certainly be thinking about. Project Search is a program that Community Partners is a part of, and that is based at Portsmouth Hospital. So, you know, a couple of post-secondary education and training options specifically designed for people with intellectual disabilities. That's what those things that I just mentioned are. And then there are lots of other options as well. And there are just the general practices of understanding the differences between high school and college. If your child is more likely to go on to get some kind of regular 2-year or 4-year degree, that's another set of information that you need to dig into. And so I'm going to send you some links to materials about that. thinkcollege.net is a link that you'll find in there, and then a document about the differences between high school and college disability supports will also be in that document. So let's see, I did a little speed talking at the end there. I was speed talking the whole time, wasn't I? Let me take a, well, I'm not going to pull that up. You'll get a zip drive. It'll have lots of transition resources in it. If you're interested, you are welcome to set up a personal consultation with me. We can meet just like this, one-on-one, over Zoom, and talk more specifically about transition planning for your student. I'm happy to do that. You can put that into the chat. And indicate if that's something that you'd like. If you don't want to decide right now, you can respond to the email that Jackie is going to send you. When she sends you the resources, you could just reply and say, I would like to set up a consult with Heidi, and she'll forward that on to me. So what kinds of questions? Does anybody have any questions? I covered a lot of ground because I wanted to make sure that we were done by 6 and open for just general whatever we wanted to talk about at this stage of the game. So.
Can I say something helpful?
Of course.
I don't know. Can you see me?
No? I can.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi.
So I just want you all to know, and I think many of you know that I have a daughter, Dana, who is now, get this, 23 years old. She just had her birthday. I feel like transition was just the other day, but we're actually well beyond that now. What you guys are all going through is doable. It feels scary. And I just want you to know, when you cross and when you get on the other side of the finish line, it's a wonderful feeling to check all those check boxes, to talk about guardianship and what make those kind of decisions, the Social Security, all of the pieces of transitioning. I just want you to know that it's hard to hear it all like this because it's a lot of information. Heidi, it's a lot of information.
I totally understand. I know. I wish there was a way to simplify it, and I haven't figured that out yet.
There just isn't. This is a little different than going through the IEP process, which I'll say on the other side, when Dana had her last IEP meeting, we were so excited. We had an ice cream party that we graduated and we would never have to do another IEP. That was really fantastic. Going into this, it's a little different, and it's nice that it's not the same as going through the school district. So it feels a little bit lighter and different. But there's a lot of pieces, overwhelming at some times, but that's why you have, Heidi, we'll talk a little bit later about about doing some one-on-ones with people. And there you have Cheryl and Jay to guide you through each piece of this, but it's, to break it down and help you with it, help you digest it. Again, it's a lot of information all at once, but I can tell you, I'm on the other side of it. I made it, and I'm also, as you know, a working mom, so there was a lot to juggle, and I made it on the other side, and I just want you to hear that, and hopefully that helps a little bit. That's all.
Thank you, Jackie.
You're welcome.
Uncomfortable with the information, feel free to sign off. I'm going to stay on until everybody has signed off. But that is the end of the content for today.